Imagine a life lived completely outside the rules. A man who chose absolute freedom over all else, vanishing into the wilderness for half a century. His name was Homer Davenport, and his story is unlike any other. For 58 years, Redrock Mountain was his world, a remote, rugged sanctuary where the whispers of modern society never reached. He became a legend, a shadow, a ghost to some, but to himself, he was simply free. This isn't just a tale of survival. It's a deep dive into the mind of a man who turned his back on everything we know, carving out an existence defined by isolation and the raw, untamed beauty of the Appalachian wilderness. To truly understand Homer Davenport, we must first look back, far beyond his birth in 1910, to the roots of his family tree. It begins with an ambitious Scot named Esam Davenport. In 1821, Esam arrived on American shores, a young man with fire in his belly and a burning desire to make his mark. He was just one of countless immigrants seeking a new life, but Esam possessed a relentless drive that set him apart. He wasn't content with just a piece of the American dream. He wanted to own a significant chunk of it. His journey led him inland, away from the bustling coastal cities and into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. He found his way to Smith County, Virginia, a place of rolling hills, dense forests, and clear, winding rivers. The land was wild, untamed, and full of potential for a man willing to work. Esam was more than willing. He saw opportunity where others saw only hardship. He started small, working tirelessly, his hands calloused and his back aching from sunup to sundown. He cleared land, planted crops, and built a modest home for himself. Every penny he earned was saved. Every moment of daylight was spent toiling. Esam Davenport was not just a farmer. He was a shrewd businessman with a keen eye for expansion. He understood the value of land, and he knew how to acquire it. Slowly, meticulously, he began to buy up parcels of the surrounding wilderness. He traded, he negotiated, he saved every dollar, and he reinvested it into more acreage. What started as a small homestead grew into a formidable estate. Over the years, Esam amassed an astonishing amount of property, eventually owning over 3 zoozilaran acres of prime Clinch mountain land. He had built an empire, not of gold or industry, but of earth and timber, a testament to his sheer will and relentless hard work. He had truly lived the American dream, forging a powerful legacy from nothing. But even the mightiest empires can crumble, and Esam's legacy, though impressive, was not immune to the ravages of time and human weakness. When Esam Davenport finally passed away, his vast wealth and extensive land holdings were divided among his descendants. What he had painstakingly built through decades of sweat and sacrifice, his heirs struggled to maintain. They lacked his vision, his work ethic, and his shrewd business sense. The land, once a source of immense prosperity, slowly became fragmented, mismanaged, and ultimately a burden. Generation after generation, the wealth Esam had accumulated dwindled. Good intentions often gave way to poor decisions. The land was sold off in pieces, sometimes for quick cash, other times lost to debt or simply neglected. The family fortunes eroded, and with each passing decade, the Davenports slipped further from the prominent position Esam had carved out for them. By the time Homer Davenport was born, the family name, once associated with vast land ownership and prosperity, had become synonymous with poverty. The descendants of the ambitious Scot, who had owned thousands of acres, were now struggling to put food on the table, living in the same Appalachian mountains, but a world away from their ancestors' success. The once grand legacy had faded, leaving behind only the ghost of former glory and a harsh reality for those who followed. It was into this world of struggle and forgotten greatness that Homer Davenport would be born. A world shaped by the rise and fall of family fortunes, a world that would ultimately push him to seek a different path entirely. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Homer Davenport was born in 1910, right there on the same mountain his great-great-grandfather Esam had settled so many decades before. But the world Homer entered was starkly different from Esam's. There was no empire to inherit, no vast tracts of land waiting to be worked. Instead, Homer was born into a life defined by the lingering shadow of poverty, a direct result of his ancestors' inability to hold on to Esam's hard-won fortune. His early years were marked by hardship, a constant struggle for survival that seemed to cling to the Davenport name like the mountain mist. His mother, a woman worn down by endless toil, did her best to provide, but the odds were stacked against her. Life in the Appalachian Mountains in the early 20th century was brutal for those without means. Every day was a fight against hunger, cold, and the unforgiving land. Homer knew the sting of an empty stomach and the chill of a drafty cabin from his earliest memories. He watched his mother labor tirelessly, her spirit slowly eroding under the weight of their circumstances. The small comforts were few and far between. Then, when Homer was just 6 years old, his mother succumbed to the relentless pressures of her life. She passed away, leaving a gaping void in the boy's already difficult existence. Her death was not sudden or dramatic. It was the quiet, inevitable end of a life lived on the brink, a life that had simply run out of strength. With his mother gone, Homer was sent to live with his grandmother. This was not a move driven by affection or comfort, but by necessity. His grandmother, a stern and unyielding woman, saw Homer not as a grandchild to cherish, but as another mouth to feed, another burden in her already arduous life. She made no secret of her resentment, and Homer felt the weight of her disapproval in every interaction. Childhood for Homer was not a time of play and innocence. From the moment he arrived at his grandmother's home, his days were filled with relentless labor. He was put to work on the small, rocky plot of land, tending to meager crops, hauling water, chopping wood, tasks far too heavy for a boy his age. His grandmother believed in hard work and strict discipline, often enforced with a heavy hand and sharp words. Beyond the physical demands, his grandmother was also deeply religious, and she instilled in Homer a rigid fire and brimstone version of faith. Sundays were spent in the small, austere church, where sermons about sin and damnation echoed through the wooden pews. It was here, paradoxically, that Homer found a flicker of solace and a small rebellion. The church, with its worn hymnals and faded Bible, was where he learned to read. The words on the page offered an escape, a brief moment of quiet contemplation away from the constant demands of his grandmother. He devoured the stories, finding a world beyond his immediate harsh reality. But even this small refuge brought trouble. As he grew into a young man, the church also became a place where Homer, despite his rough upbringing, began to notice the girls. He was a tall, lean young man with a quiet intensity that some of them found intriguing. A few stolen glances, a hushed word exchanged after services, a shy smile. These small interactions were his first taste of something other than endless work and his grandmother's disapproval. However, in a community where strict religious adherence governed every aspect of life, even innocent flirtations were frowned upon, especially for a boy like Homer, who was already perceived as a difficult and unruly presence by many. His grandmother saw it as further evidence of his wayward nature, leading to more arguments and more punishment. The church, which had offered him the gift of literacy, also became a source of conflict, deepening the rift between him and the rigid expectations of his family. Homer's life was a pressure cooker, simmering with resentment, hardship, and a growing sense of injustice. The constant labor, the lack of affection, the oppressive religious strictures, and the poverty that seemed inescapable all combined to forge a volatile spirit within him. He was a young man, pushed to his limits, And eventually, something had to give. The turning point came when he was 19 years old. The details are hazy, lost to the passage of time and the reluctance of those who knew him to speak openly about the incident. What is clear, however, is that Homer, in a moment of desperation or rage, became involved in a violent altercation. It escalated quickly, ending with a shooting. The specifics of who was shot, or the exact circumstances, remained guarded secrets, but the outcome was undeniable and life-altering for Homer. The law, a distant and often indifferent force in the remote mountains, finally caught up with him. At the age of 19, Homer Davenport was arrested and convicted. His punishment was a sentence in the Virginia State Penitentiary. He spent 18 months behind those cold, unforgiving walls from 1929 to 1931. This period marked a profound shift in Homer's life. The experience of being caged, stripped of his freedom, and forced into a structured, dehumanizing environment had a deep and lasting impact. It was in that prison, far from the mountain air and the familiar, if harsh, landscape of his youth, that Homer Davenport truly began to understand what freedom meant to him and what he was willing to do to secure it. The prison walls, meant to contain him, instead fueled a fierce, unyielding desire for absolute independence, hardening his resolve and shaping the man he would become. The cold, hard reality of prison life was a shock to Homer. He had known hardship, but never this kind of confinement. The iron bars and the constant surveillance pressed in on him, making him feel like an animal trapped in a cage. Every day blurred into the next, marked by the clang of cell doors and the monotonous routines imposed by his captors. The mountain air he had breathed since birth, even the harsh, thin air of his grandmother's cabin, felt like a distant dream. Here, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair. He watched the other inmates, their faces etched with resignation or bitterness, and felt a growing sense of alienation. He knew he was different. He didn't belong in this world of concrete and steel, of schedules and rules. The isolation he felt was profound, deeper than any solitude he had known on the mountain. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. It was in this forced solitude that a deep-seated aversion to others began to solidify within him. He saw the petty squabbles, the power dynamics, the way men broke under pressure, and he wanted no part of it. The prison wasn't just taking his freedom. It was trying to take his spirit, to mold him into something he wasn't. But instead of breaking him, it forged in him an unyielding resolve. He vowed that if he ever got out, he would never again allow himself to be beholden to anyone or anything. He would seek absolute freedom, a life where he answered only to himself and the natural world. This vow became his silent mantra, a burning ember in the darkness of his days. When Homer walked out of the Virginia State Penitentiary gates in 1931, he was a changed man. The 18 months inside had hardened him, stripping away any last vestiges of youthful naivety. He was still only 20 years old, but he carried the weight of a much older man. The world he re-entered was also different, plunged into the depths of the Great Depression. The economic collapse had swept across the nation, leaving a trail of unemployment, poverty, and desperation. For Homer, who had already known a life of struggle, the sight of men begging for work, standing in breadlines and losing their homes only reinforced his growing disillusionment with modern society. He saw how easily people were controlled by forces beyond their grasp, how dependent they were on systems that could crumble overnight. He observed men, once proud and independent, now forced to compromise their dignity, to work for meager wages, or worse, to lose everything. They were cogs in a machine, easily replaced, easily broken. This spectacle of human vulnerability, of men stripped of their self-sufficiency, solidified his desire to live a different kind of life. He didn't want to be a part of that machine. He didn't want to rely on a paycheck, or a boss, or a fickle economy. He wanted to be free from the constraints of society, free from its expectations, its laws, and its inevitable disappointments. The prison had shown him the ultimate lack of freedom, and the depression was showing him the illusion of it. He craved an existence where his survival depended solely on his own wits and the bounty of nature, not on the whims of others or the instability of a broken system. The decision was not made lightly, but it was made with an unwavering conviction. Homer Davenport chose to disappear. He would vanish from society, from the records, from the memories of those who knew him, and claim his absolute independence on Redrock Mountain. It was the only place he felt truly at home, the only place he believed he could truly be free. He knew the mountain's secrets, its dangers, and its promises. It was a place where a man could live or die by his own hand, a place where the rules of civilization held no sway. The thought of leaving behind the chaos and uncertainty of the modern world, of shedding the burden of societal expectations, filled him with a quiet sense of purpose. He would become a ghost, a whisper, a legend, but most importantly, he would become his own man. Redrock Mountain itself was a formidable place, a sprawling wilderness of steep slopes, dense forests, and rocky outcrops. It was not a gentle landscape, but a raw, untamed environment that demanded respect and resilience from anyone who dared to call it home. The air here was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the fetid air of the penitentiary. Towering hardwoods, ancient oaks and maples, formed a thick canopy that filtered the sunlight, creating pockets of perpetual shade. Beneath them, a tangled undergrowth of rhododendron and mountain laurel made passage difficult, often requiring a man to push his way through the dense foliage, every step a deliberate effort. The mountain was teeming with wildlife, an ecosystem thriving far from human interference. Deer, black bears, wild turkeys, and countless smaller creatures made their homes in its valleys and on its ridges. Their tracks crisscrossed the forest floor, a constant reminder of the vibrant life that pulsed through the wilderness. Homer knew he would be sharing his sanctuary with these animals, becoming another part of the intricate web of life and death that governed Redrock. The weather on the mountain could be extreme, swinging from scorching summer days to brutal snow-laden winters. Sudden thunderstorms could transform peaceful streams into raging torrents, and heavy snowfalls could isolate the mountain for weeks, cutting off any possibility of contact with the outside world. This was not a place for the faint of heart, or for those who sought comfort. It was a place that would test a man's limits, physically and mentally, every single day. But for Homer, this untamed wilderness was not a challenge to be conquered, but a partner in his quest for freedom. It was a place where he could finally be truly alive, truly himself. Homer Davenport moved with a quiet, practiced grace through the dense undergrowth of Redrock Mountain. His eyes, now keenly accustomed to the subtle shifts of light and shadow, scanned the terrain for any sign, any hint of what the mountain offered. He knew what he needed most, beyond shelter and game: water. A reliable, clean source was paramount for survival, especially if he intended to make this untamed wilderness his permanent home. Days turned into weeks as he crisscrossed the rugged landscape, always heading upwards, deeper into the less trodden areas. He followed the faint trickles of runoff, listened for the distant murmur of hidden streams, and observed where the wildlife congregated. It was a patient, methodical search, driven by an instinct for self-preservation, honed by years of hardship. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, he found it. Tucked away in a secluded cove, shielded by a natural overhang of rock and a thick curtain of rhododendron, was a spring. Not just a muddy seep, but a clear, cold spring, bubbling up from the earth with a steady, life-giving rhythm. The water was crystalline, tasting of raw earth and pure mountain minerals. It flowed into a small, natural basin, then spilled over, forming a narrow, gurgling brook that snaked its way down the hillside. Deer tracks were pressed into the damp earth around it, and the leaves of nearby plants were lush and vibrant, testifying to its constant flow. This was more than just water. It was a lifeline, the very heart of his future sanctuary. He knelt, cupped his hands, and drank deeply, a profound sense of relief washing over him. This spring would anchor him to this spot, providing the essential resource for his solitary existence. With the spring secured, Homer turned his attention to shelter. He wasn't looking for comfort, but for protection against the elements, a place to weather the brutal mountain winters and the sudden, violent storms. He found a promising spot not far from the spring, a natural rock overhang that offered a substantial roof. Against this massive rock face, he began to build. He wasn't a carpenter, but he was resourceful and determined. He scavenged fallen timber, dragging stout logs and branches from the forest floor. He used smaller branches and saplings, lashing them together with strips of bark and tough vines. His tools were rudimentary. A sturdy axe he carried, a few salvaged nails, and his own strong hands. He constructed a rudimentary three-walled shack, leaning the timber against the rock face, using it as his fourth, impenetrable wall. The gaps were filled with mud, moss, and more branches, creating a surprisingly sturdy, if rustic, dwelling. It was small, just big enough for a man to sleep, store his meager belongings, and build a small fire. It was his, carved from the mountain itself, a testament to his will to survive. His days quickly fell into a rhythm dictated by the demands of survival. Homer became a master of self-sufficiency. Hunting small game was his primary method for acquiring meat. Squirrels, rabbits, and wild turkeys were plentiful, providing a steady, if sometimes meager, supply of protein. He set snares and traps with an uncanny knack, understanding the movements and habits of the local wildlife. Fishing in the mountain streams, using simple lines and homemade lures, provided another source of food, especially in the warmer months. Beyond meat, he became an expert forager. He learned which berries were edible, which roots provided sustenance, and which wild greens could supplement his diet. He knew where to find wild ramps in spring, juicy blackberries in summer, and hickory nuts and walnuts in the fall. Every plant, every animal, every rock held a potential use or a piece of information for him. Life on Redrock Mountain was an endless cycle of seasons, each bringing its own challenges and opportunities. Spring was a time of renewal, with melting snows swelling the streams and new growth bursting forth. It was a time for repairing his shelter, preparing his traps, and enjoying the first fresh greens after a long winter. Summer brought warmth and abundance. The forest was thick with foliage, and game was easier to find. He spent long days exploring, mapping out new territories, and collecting firewood for the colder months. Fall was a crucial period, a time of intense preparation. He worked tirelessly, gathering nuts, drying berries, and smoking meat to build up his winter stores. The air grew crisp. The leaves turned vibrant colors, and the mountain began to prepare for its long sleep. Winter was the harshest season, a true test of his resilience. The snow could fall deep, blanketing the mountain in a silent, unforgiving white. Temperatures plummeted, and the wind howled through the bare trees. Days were short, and the struggle for warmth and food became paramount. He spent more time inside his small shack, tending his fire, mending his traps, and sharpening his tools. He learned to read the weather signs, to predict coming storms, and to ration his supplies carefully. Yet, even in winter's grip, there was a profound beauty in the untouched snow, the silence broken only by the crunch of his boots or the distant cry of a hawk. Over the years, Homer Davenport developed an intimate knowledge of Redrock Mountain. He knew every trail, every hidden cave, every animal path. He could move through the forest almost silently, a shadow among the trees. His senses sharpened to an extraordinary degree. He could identify birds by their calls, recognize the distant rustle of a deer, and smell a coming rainstorm long before the clouds gathered. He mastered the art of trapping, understanding the subtle psychology of the animals he hunted. He could fish with the patience of a heron, waiting for hours for the perfect strike. Foraging became second nature. He knew exactly where to find the best patches of wild edibles. He was no longer just a man living on the mountain. He had become a part of the mountain, a true mountain man, deeply intertwined with its rhythms and its wild heart. His skills were not just for survival. They were his connection, his language with the land. He had found his sanctuary, and in doing so, he had found himself. His deep connection with nature became the very fabric of Homer's existence. He spent countless hours simply observing, a silent witness to the mountain's intricate life. Each dawn brought a new symphony of bird calls. Each sunset painted the sky in hues he rarely saw mirrored in the outside world. He watched deer graze peacefully in the clearings, their movements fluid and graceful. He saw bears forage for berries, their powerful forms surprisingly gentle as they moved through the underbrush. Hawks circled high above, their keen eyes scanning the landscape below, a constant reminder of the wild hunt. Homer learned the language of the wind as it whispered through the pines, the rumble of a distant storm, the subtle shift in air that signaled a change in weather. The mountain was his teacher, his companion, and his universe. He understood its rhythms, its temperaments, its profound quietude. This solitude, far from being a burden, was a source of immense peace. It allowed him to shed the noise and pressures of human society, to reconnect with something primal and true within himself. He was never truly alone, surrounded as he was by the vibrant, breathing life of Redrock Mountain. Human contact for Homer was a rarity, a necessary evil rather than a cherished interaction. Perhaps once or twice a year, when his supplies of salt, ammunition, or perhaps a specific tool ran dangerously low, he would venture down from his mountain sanctuary. These were not casual strolls. Each trip was carefully planned, executed with a swiftness born of a desire to minimize his time among people. He would emerge from the dense woods, a figure draped in worn, practical clothing that blended with the forest, usually in a remote, small town far enough from Smith County that he wouldn't be easily recognized. His face, weathered by sun and wind, told a story of a life lived outdoors. His eyes, however, held a sharp, untamed intelligence, always scanning, always aware. He avoided direct conversations, preferring to conduct his business quickly and without fuss. His method of trade was simple, rooted in the ancient practice of bartering. Homer rarely carried money, having little use for it in his isolated world. Instead, he brought with him the fruits of his mountain labor. Furs, meticulously trapped and prepared, were highly valued. He would present a prime beaver pelt or a soft fox hide, exchanging it for a sack of salt, a box of rifle cartridges, or perhaps a new blade for his axe. Ginseng, a prized medicinal root that grew wild on Redrock Mountain, was another valuable commodity. He knew the best spots to find it, carefully digging the gnarled roots, cleaning them, and drying them. These roots fetched a good price, allowing him to acquire more substantial necessities without having to linger long in the bustling, confusing world of men. These brief forays were a stark contrast to his mountain life, a jarring reminder of the complexities he had chosen to leave behind. He would complete his transactions, nod curtly, and disappear back into the wilderness, a ghost returning to its natural habitat. As the decades passed, whispers and tales about the wild man of Redrock Mountain began to circulate among the locals in the surrounding valleys. Farmers, hunters, and even the occasional curious hiker would report fleeting glimpses of a solitary figure, moving silently through the deep woods, often disappearing before they could get a clear look. Stories grew with each telling, embellished and distorted, creating a legend. Some said he was a hermit, driven mad by loneliness. Others claimed he was a reclusive prospector, guarding a secret vein of gold. A few believed he was a fugitive, hiding from the law, though no one could ever quite recall what crime he was supposed to have committed. The truth, that he was simply Homer Davenport, a man who chose freedom, was far less dramatic, but infinitely more profound. These tales cemented his status as an almost mythical figure, a living embodiment of the untamed spirit of the Appalachian wilderness. Children were warned not to venture too deep into the woods, lest they encounter the mountain man. Yet for Homer, these stories were irrelevant. He neither knew nor cared about the legends he inspired. In his chosen isolation, Homer found a deep and abiding contentment. The constant pressure of societal expectations, the endless striving for material possessions, the petty squabbles and anxieties of civilization, all of it had vanished from his daily life. He was free from the judgment of others, free from the need to conform. His days were governed by the sun, the moon, and the changing seasons, not by clocks or calendars. His needs were simple: food, water, shelter, and the freedom to roam. And Redrock Mountain provided all of it in abundance. He had built a life on his own terms, a life stripped down to its essential elements. There was a profound fulfillment in knowing that every meal, every warmth, every moment of peace was earned directly through his own efforts, his own connection to the land. He felt a sense of belonging to the mountain that he had never felt among people. This was his home, his haven, his kingdom. The quiet satisfaction of his solitary existence was a testament to his unwavering commitment to a life unburdened by the complexities of the world he had left behind. He had sought freedom, and on Redrock Mountain he had truly found it. He had carved out a space where he was sovereign, a place where the only rules were those dictated by the wild itself. The tranquility Homer found on Redrock Mountain was hard-won, a constant negotiation with the raw, untamed forces of nature. Life in the wilderness was not a gentle pastoral scene. It was a daily battle for survival, a relentless test of wit and endurance. The mountain, while providing sustenance, also presented formidable challenges. Severe weather was a constant threat. Summer brought intense heat, baking the exposed rock faces and turning streams into trickles, making water a precious commodity. Thunderstorms could erupt with terrifying speed and violence, sending lightning bolts tearing through the sky and unleashing deluges that turned gentle paths into raging torrents. Flash floods were a real danger, capable of sweeping away shelter and supplies in an instant. Winter, however, was the ultimate adversary. The Appalachian winters were brutal, with heavy snowfall often isolating Homer for weeks on end. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing, and the wind, unimpeded by human structures, howled through the gaps in his rudimentary shelter. Frostbite was a constant concern, and simply staying warm became an all-consuming task. He learned to read the subtle signs of an approaching blizzard, stockpiling firewood with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Scarcity was another persistent challenge. While the mountain was rich in resources, there were times when game was scarce, or berries were late, or a harsh frost killed off a patch of wild onions he relied on. These periods demanded extreme rationing and an even greater reliance on his deep knowledge of the land, forcing him to search far and wide for any edible scrap. Beyond the elements, the mountain held dangers from its wild inhabitants. While Homer respected and understood the animals, he knew they could be unpredictable. A cornered bear, a pack of hungry coyotes, or even a venomous snake could turn a routine foraging trip into a life-or-death struggle. He carried his rifle not just for hunting, but also for protection, a silent testament to the inherent risks of his chosen existence. He had learned to move through the woods with a quiet awareness, his senses always alert, his ears finely tuned to the snap of a twig or the rustle in the undergrowth that might signal a hidden threat. Every day was a lesson in humility, a reminder that he was a small part of a much larger, wilder system, and his survival depended on his ability to adapt and respect its power. Homer's resilience was not just physical, it was deeply ingrained in his spirit. He bore the hardships with a stoicism that only comes from years of facing adversity alone. Each challenge overcome, each harsh winter survived, each period of scarcity endured, only solidified his connection to the mountain and his belief in his chosen path. He became a master of adaptation, constantly learning and refining his methods. When game was scarce, he found new traps or expanded his foraging range. When a storm threatened his shelter, he reinforced it with whatever materials he could find. He learned to make do with less, to improvise, and to find ingenious solutions to problems that would send most city dwellers into despair. His resourcefulness was legendary, even if it was only known to himself and the silent trees. He patched his clothes with animal hides, fashioned tools from fallen branches, and built fires that could burn efficiently, even in a downpour. His body became lean and strong, his movements efficient and quiet. His senses sharpened to an almost animalistic degree, allowing him to navigate the deepest woods with ease, even in low light. This constant struggle, far from breaking him, forged him into an unbreakable man. He found a strange satisfaction in the purity of his struggle, the direct link between effort and survival. There were no hidden agendas, no complex social games, just the stark reality of existence and his ability to meet it head-on. He was a living testament to the human capacity for endurance, a man who had not just survived, but thrived in conditions that would defeat most others. His life was a slow, deliberate act of building his own strength, brick by brick, against the relentless forces of the wild. Homer's life also represented a profound philosophical outlook. He had completely rejected the materialism that drove the world he had left behind. Possessions meant nothing to him beyond their utility. A good knife, a sturdy axe, a reliable rifle. These were his treasures. He didn't crave more because more would only complicate his life, tie him down, and ultimately diminish his freedom. His belief was in a simpler, more authentic way of life, one dictated by the natural world rather than the artificial constructs of society. He saw the endless pursuit of wealth and status as a trap, a cage that people willingly built for themselves. He had seen firsthand how the Great Depression had stripped people of their dignity and independence, making them reliant on others for their very survival. He wanted no part of that. For Homer, true wealth was not measured in dollars or acres, but in the vastness of the sky, the purity of the spring water, the quiet strength of the ancient trees, and the deep satisfaction of self-reliance. He found meaning in the cycle of the seasons, the hunt, the harvest, and the simple act of existing in harmony with his surroundings. His worldview was shaped by the mountain itself, stark and uncompromising, yet also incredibly generous to those who understood its ways. He believed in earning his keep from the earth, in taking only what he needed, and in respecting the balance of nature. This was his personal creed, a silent philosophy forged in the crucible of his solitary existence, a powerful counter-narrative to the consumer-driven world beyond his sanctuary. He was a living critique of modernity, a man who had found his own version of paradise by shedding everything society deemed essential. Decades passed in this profound isolation, marked not by calendars or anniversaries, but by the relentless rhythmic turning of the seasons. The spring thaws gave way to lush summers, which then faded into vibrant autumns before yielding to the stark beauty of winter. Each cycle brought subtle changes to Homer, etching more lines onto his face, silvering the hair in his beard and slowly stiffening his joints. He was no longer the young, fire-eyed man who had first vanished into the woods. He was aging, becoming a part of the ancient landscape, his presence as established and enduring as the trees around him. 58 years melted into the past, a lifetime lived apart. The world outside his mountain sanctuary continued its breakneck pace of change, but Homer remained blissfully unaware. The invention of television, the moon landing, civil rights movements, 2 more world wars, the explosion of technology. None of these monumental shifts touched Homer's consciousness. He knew nothing of the Cold War, the rise of rock and roll, or the increasing globalization that was reshaping human civilization. His news came from the rustle of leaves, the call of a distant owl, the tracks of a deer in the snow. His world was still one of hand tools, open fires, and the primal struggle for sustenance. The roar of an occasional distant airplane might have been the only faint echo of the progress he had rejected, a fleeting sound quickly absorbed by the vast silence of the mountain. He saw no newspapers, heard no radio, and spoke to no one who could relay the stories of a world rushing headlong into the future. Homer Davenport remained oblivious to the vast changes occurring in the world outside his mountain sanctuary. His life was a living time capsule, a testament to a way of being that the rest of humanity had largely abandoned. While cities grew, technologies advanced, and societies wrestled with complex political and social issues, Homer's days were governed by the same ancient rhythms that had guided his ancestors for millennia. The modern world, with its incessant demands and bewildering complexities, was simply a concept that held no sway in his quiet kingdom. He was untouched by its anxieties, its innovations, and its rapid evolution. He had chosen his peace, and the mountain, in its silent wisdom, had kept that peace for him, shielding him from the very forces he had sought to escape. His ignorance was not a lack, but a deliberate choice, a powerful statement of self-determination. Homer Davenport remained oblivious to the vast changes occurring in the world outside his mountain sanctuary. His life was a living time capsule, a testament to a way of being that the rest of humanity had largely abandoned. While cities grew, technologies advanced, and societies wrestled with complex political and social issues, Homer's days were governed by the same ancient rhythms that had guided his ancestors for millennia. The modern world, with its incessant demands and bewildering complexities, was simply a concept that held no sway in his quiet kingdom. He was untouched by its anxieties, its innovations, and its rapid evolution. He had chosen his peace, and the mountain, in its silent wisdom, had kept that peace for him, shielding him from the very forces he had sought to escape. His ignorance was not a lack, but a deliberate choice, a powerful statement of self-determination. Yet, even the most secluded lives eventually intersect with the outside world. Homer Davenport's existence, after 58 years of near-complete isolation, finally came to light through a combination of chance and persistent curiosity. It began with a young deer hunter, new to the area, who had ventured deeper into Redrock Mountain than most locals dared. He wasn't looking for a legendary wild man. He was simply tracking a particularly large buck. As he moved through a dense thicket, he stumbled upon a faint, almost invisible trail, unlike any game path he had ever seen. It led him to a small, expertly camouflaged lean-to, sheltered by a massive rock overhang. Inside, he found crude but well-maintained tools, a stack of carefully dried herbs, and a small, smoldering fire. The hunter, startled and intrigued, quickly retreated, but the image of the primitive dwelling stayed with him. He recounted his discovery to a few older, skeptical locals who at first dismissed it as an animal's den or an old trapper's abandoned camp. However, the hunter's description of the meticulous organization and the clear signs of recent occupation sparked a dormant memory in one of the elders. the whispers of the wild man of Redrock Mountain, a legend many believed had long since died or moved on. This elder, a man named Silas, remembered stories from his grandfather about a young Homer Davenport who had vanished decades ago. A few days later, Silas and the young hunter returned to the site, this time more cautiously. They waited, hidden, observing the lean-to from a distance. After several hours, a figure emerged from the woods, moving with a silent, almost animal-like grace. It was an old man, his beard long and tangled, his clothes made of patched hides, his eyes sharp and alert. Homer Davenport, the man who had been forgotten by time, was finally seen. The news of the discovery spread quickly, first through the local community, then reaching the ears of a regional newspaper reporter. The idea of a man living completely off the grid for nearly 6 decades was a sensational story, tailor-made for public fascination. In a world increasingly interconnected and urbanized, Homer's tale offered a stark contrast, a romanticized vision of ultimate freedom and self-reliance. The media descended upon Smith County, eager to capture the essence of this enigmatic recluse. Reporters and photographers, armed with modern equipment, tried to approach Homer's mountain sanctuary. They imagined a grizzled, unkempt hermit, perhaps even a madman, but they found a man who, though wary, possessed an undeniable dignity. The initial reports painted Homer as a living relic, a window into a bygone era. The public was captivated by the idea of someone rejecting everything modern society held dear. There was widespread curiosity about how he survived, what he ate, and how he endured such profound solitude. People wondered if he was lonely, if he missed human contact, or if he regretted his choice. The story tapped into a primal longing for simplicity and independence that many felt was lost in their own lives. Homer Davenport became a symbol, an almost mythical figure, representing a path not taken, a life unburdened by societal expectations. With the media frenzy came attempts at reintegration. Local authorities, concerned for Homer's well-being, sent representatives to Redrock Mountain. They were accompanied by social workers and even a doctor, all hoping to understand his life and potentially bring him down to civilization. They offered him a warm home, proper food, medical care, and the comforts of modern life. They spoke of the advancements he had missed, the changes in the world, trying to entice him with promises of ease and security. They saw him as someone who needed to be rescued from his primitive existence, believing he was deprived. But Homer's resistance was steadfast. He listened patiently, his keen eyes assessing each person, each offer. He understood their words, but their concepts held no meaning for him. He had no desire for their comforts, which he likely viewed as entrapments. His home was the mountain, his sustenance came from his own hands, and his freedom was his most prized possession. He politely but firmly refused every offer. He made it clear, without aggression, but with unwavering resolve, that he belonged to the mountain, and the mountain belonged to him. He valued his independence above all else, seeing their attempts as an encroachment on the very freedom he had spent a lifetime cultivating. He had chosen this life, and he would not be coaxed or coerced into abandoning it. His refusal only deepened the public's fascination. Homer Davenport became more than just a man. He became a powerful symbol. He represented the ultimate defiance against conformity, a living critique of the rat race, and a testament to the human spirit's capacity for self-determination. In an era of increasing globalization and societal pressures, Homer's story resonated deeply with those who felt trapped by their circumstances. He was an embodiment of radical independence, a reminder that there was another way to live, a way free from the burdens of modern life. He challenged the very notion of what it meant to be civilized or successful. His life, lived in stark simplicity on Redrock Mountain, became a silent but potent question mark against the relentless march of progress, prompting many to ponder what true freedom really meant. Homer Davenport, having firmly rejected the world's attempts to reclaim him, continued his life on Redrock Mountain. The media attention eventually faded, but the legend of the wild man endured, whispered around campfires and in quiet country stores. He was left in peace, though perhaps not entirely forgotten. As the years turned into decades, Homer felt the inexorable march of time in his own body. The sharp eyes that once spotted a rabbit at 100 paces grew a little dimmer. The strong hands that expertly set traps and carved tools began to tremble slightly with age. The agile steps that carried him silently through the forest became slower, more deliberate, and occasionally a little unsteady. The mountain, his constant companion, remained unchanged in its stoic grandeur, but Homer's relationship with it evolved. He could no longer scale the steepest inclines with the same youthful vigor, nor could he endure the biting cold of winter nights without a deeper ache in his bones. He adapted, as he always had. He learned to conserve his energy, to rely more on his accumulated wisdom and less on brute strength. His hunting became more strategic, his foraging more efficient. He spent more time in the shelter of his lean-to, tending his small fire, listening to the wind sigh through the pines, and watching the changing light filter through the canopy. He understood that his time was drawing to a close, not with fear, but with a quiet acceptance that only a life lived so intimately with nature could bring. He had seen countless cycles of birth and death on the mountain, understood that every living thing had its season. His was simply approaching its autumn. He had no regrets, no unfulfilled desires. He had lived the life he chose, free and unbound, exactly as he had envisioned it all those years ago when he walked out of that prison gate. The mountain had been his home, his provider, his sanctuary, and his only true companion. The exact circumstances of Homer Davenport's death remained shrouded in the same mystery that had defined much of his life. There was no one to witness his final moments, no one to mourn at his side. He simply became one with the mountain he loved. It is believed that he passed away sometime in the late 1980s, after nearly 6 decades of self-imposed exile. A group of hikers, years after the initial media frenzy, stumbled upon his lean-to. This time, there was no smoldering fire, no signs of recent occupation. The tools were still there, weathered and worn, but a stillness had settled over the place. A few personal effects, a tattered blanket, a crudely carved wooden cup, spoke of a life lived simply and purposefully. There was no body, no grave, just the quiet evidence of a life that had been. The mountain had taken him back, absorbing him into its vast, silent embrace. Homer Davenport's passing marked the end of an era, but not the end of his story. His legend only grew stronger with his disappearance. He became one of America's most legendary mountain men, a figure whose life transcended the ordinary. His story, passed down through generations, served as a powerful reminder of a different way of living, a challenge to the norms of society. He wasn't just a recluse. He was a philosopher in action, an embodiment of radical self-reliance and an unwavering commitment to personal freedom. His life forces a deep reflection on society itself. In a world obsessed with progress, consumption, and constant connection, Homer Davenport chose the path of extreme detachment. Was he a hermit to be pitied, or a sage to be admired? His existence raises profound questions about human connection, the true meaning of independence, and our relationship with the natural world. Did he miss anything by rejecting society? Or did he gain something far more valuable, an unadulterated sense of self, a profound peace that modern civilization often struggles to find? His story makes one wonder about the price of conformity and the cost of freedom. Homer Davenport, the man who spent 58 years in complete isolation on Redrock Mountain, lived a macabre life, only in the sense that it was so utterly different, so starkly contrasted with the lives of most people. It was macabre because it dared to defy the fundamental assumptions about human needs and desires. He was not a monster, nor was he a victim. He was a man who made a choice, a powerful, unwavering choice, and lived by it until his very last breath. He proved that it was possible to exist entirely on one's own terms, to forge a path so distinct that it became a legend. He was a testament to the untamed spirit that still flickers within the human heart, a quiet rebellion against the cages of convention. His story, echoing through the hollows and peaks of Redrock Mountain, stands as a timeless narrative of ultimate freedom, a life lived profoundly and authentically, just as he intended.